So the clay is mixed up in a pug mill, and then it's extruded, and basically the molecules of the clay are moving in every which way direction. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting all those molecules all lined up to where they're moving in a counterclockwise direction, okay? And that gives me a nice smooth consistency of the clay. And then I'll bring it back down. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing up the clay, and it's going like this. Okay? You know, a lot of people say, oh, you got to be strong to move that much clay around. Really not. It's all about leverage. Using your body. There's a story of back in the Bauhaus days, what was that, the 20s, the 30s? There was a German potter, this little old lady named Marguerite Wildenheim. She was probably in her 80s. She could throw 50, 60 pounds of clay. And she just used her body as leverage. She'd push again, put her feet up on walls and just lay into the clay.
She was German, wasn't she?
Yeah.
That
explain
everything.
Termination. Okay, so what I'm doing here is it's called centering for those non-potters that are here. And centering allows the form to maintain its shape. Once it gets out of center, you are in big trouble. I described to you that pot flying all over the audience. That pot went off center after I knocked the foot pedal off, because gravity and centrifugal force want to make it fall. And the taller you get, the thinner the walls get, and the weaker the pot gets. So you want to keep it on center. And for me, doing it for almost 40 years, I had to I did a video, and they asked me to explain a lot of this stuff. And I came to the realization that a lot of the principles that I use here actually apply to what I do in everyday life. Like trying to stay centered, that means focused, balanced life. Clay always manages to humble you. You know, you get to the point where, oh, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm getting a little overconfident, a little cocky about this. Well, guess what? Clay will put you right back in your place. So I'm opening it up. And when you're opening up that ball of clay, it stretches, it gets out of center. So I've got to compress it again and get it back on center. So I'm removing a lot of that wobbling that you'll get. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying downward pressure with this hand, and I'm applying pressure this way and squeezing. So I'm compressing all those molecules together to get it back to its density. So the goal here is to maximize or utilize as much of the clay as I possibly can, that the form will, what the form can tolerate. because some forms are more extreme than others, and these bulbous forms are considered pretty extreme.
How many years did it take you to get to the bulbous level?
Probably 30.
Yeah.
It took a long time. And just like anything else, it takes a lot of practice. And it takes a lot of perseverance, tenacity, a lot of patience. It can if you want to get any good at it, you got to be able to tolerate and be patient, and you can't just rush into it. I want to do it now, and you know how today's society, we're all, I want this on a silver platter right now, and you're not going to get it by doing this. This is it's a good way to learn.
Sounds like therapy, John.
Well, it is. It is. When I was teaching, I had many of my students were professionals, people that had high-stress jobs, computer programmers, doctors, lawyers, and architects. And they would ask, I'd ask them, why are you taking this class? Oh, I need the therapy. And this is it.
So this is the polling part, correct?
This is correct. Thanks for keeping me back on track.
And that's magic clay, right?
Yeah, I pre-programmed the wheel, and I'm just a stunt man here.
There's a little machine in there pushing it up.
Yep, exactly. Now, this is a good tool to have, sponge on a stick, because you don't want to let the water congregate in the inside the cylinder here, because water will over time breaks down the clay body, makes all that plastic china clay, they call it. It just dissolves. So as I'm pulling, I'm basically pinching, and then I'm moving. Pinching the walls of the cylinder, squeezing, and then moving my hands up at a steady speed. But as I get higher, it gets more difficult to control, because remember, I got to keep it on center, and it wants to, as I go, it wants to go like this and then like this on its own. So I've got to, though, that's one of the laws of nature I have to kind of deal with. So when I'm working on those large forms, I can spend 3 or 4 hours on one piece, just trying to perfect the shape.
Clay doesn't get tired in that period of time?
For me, I guess I've learned to prevent it from happening.
Do you use torches and hair dryers
Yeah,
and
I
things?
have. Yeah. I'm not afraid to admit that. But what all the torch does, like I've got one back there, in case I get in a little trouble here, it removes some of the moisture out of the clay, so it stiffens it up so I can expand it if I have to. So this top piece is called the bead, and I compress that, because that helps it from spreading out. Okay, now what I'm doing is I've pulled it up as much as I want to. So what I'm doing is I'm starting to create the form, and I still have the wall pinched between my inside fingers and my outside fingers. and I'm applying more pressure with the inside hand to get it out. And if I wanted to bring it in, I apply more pressure with the outside hand. So, what I'm going to make this round, so as I stretch it out, if everything was the same consistent thickness throughout, when it came to bulging it out, that thickness would just diminish to barely nothing. So I've got to compensate with that by leaving a little extra clay right in this area for that expansion.
So, and that's just done by feel, the thickness in that area?
Mm-hmm. And how, you know, I kind of have an idea of how far out I want to bring it. And while I'm throwing the piece, the clay and I are having this dialogue of sorts. It lets me know when I can sense when something is going to happen. And so I either back off or I say, oh, let's go for it. And sometimes by doing that, I try and take my work almost to the point of collapse. And the trick is getting it to the point where it doesn't collapse. You know, I could play it safe and say, okay, I've made my shape, but the walls are that thick. So I'm spending all this time trimming all that thickness away. Maximize as much clay as you can in the form, so you don't have to. You're not trimming your piece. So doing this is almost like driving a car. You got a gas pedal here, and you need to know when to slow it down or speed up to get out of. Like sometimes if I'm getting in trouble, if I just give it a little speed up, it kind of whips things into shape, especially on those bottle forms with that real thin neck. They start to wobble a little bit, so I'll just speed up the wheel with and I'm controlled with my fingers, and before you know it, the thing's back on center. It's kind of like a centrifugal force will, what are those things? Gyroscopes. They wobble, and then the more speed they build up, they stand up. It's basically the same principle. Okay, so I'm going to start with using my rib, and I like to use this small one. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the bottom here. I'm going to start shaping and setting the bottom, because if the bottom is off center, the rest of the pot will be off center. So I've got to make sure I've got that right. So I'm going to start it here.
What do you mean setting the bottom?
Okay, I'm starting to set the curve, if that's what you're asking. So what I'm doing...
the bottom of the pot and the actual clay at the bottom?
Yeah, well, the bottom of the wall, okay? So as you can see, this is what's touched the rib. Okay, and then I've held the rib basically at an angle like this. If I hold the rib at a totally perpendicular to the wall, it tends to grab and gouge the pot. And a lot of people that, you know, think, oh wow, I'm going to do that, throw with a rib, they learn really quick. And they either figure it out, or come ask somebody that's done it, or they just give up because it's too hard. So.
Sounds like you gotta be willing to fail a few times, huh?
Yeah,
A lot.
a lot. And you know, it's when I was teaching, you know, students, you know, I demonstrate for them, and every once in a while I have a failure. And they all look at each other like, oh my God, he failed. Right, Tina?
What did you say again about the rib as far as the angle? If it's too straight?
If it's perpendicular to the wall, it
Right.
will tend to grab into the wall. And
versus an angle.
versus, because the wheel's going this way, it's
Yeah.
Soften the edge
grazing,
a little bit, huh?
yeah, instead of a real hard edge, okay? Okay, so now I'm going in with my bigger rib, and it's got a nice round curve, so I'm going to actually be in there going like this. Okay? And a lot of beginning potters, they're so used to seeing people throw up in the upward direction, but it's also good to throw down, because I do that to help refine some of the shape. And I can also take, let's say I've accidentally gotten it a little too thin here, I can move clay either up to fill that thinness, or I can take clay from down below or up above and move it down into that thin spot.
So you're supporting on the outside and removing on the inside?
Yes. Well, I'm moving both. The hands are moving perpendicular.
Right,
to one
but
another.
you're taking a little clay off on the inside, and the outside is
Yeah,
more
it's
of a
just
support.
surface clay though. It's slip. Sometimes you can use too little clay, and then sometimes you can be, you know, this is a problem with a lot of guys. You know, think, I'm a strong guy. I can muster this up, and they end up being humiliated because the clay's pushing them around, and they don't have a clue what they're doing. But so that's kind of, you know, that goes back to that humbling part.
You have some idea of where you're going to take the neck as you're doing this?
Yeah, I'm going to take it in. I'm going to, actually, it's going to hopefully get about yay big.
Got it.
If you look at the forms out on the table there, or on the pedestals, you'll see that.
And so you, in particular, will leave that a fair amount of clay at the top there.
Yeah, because I've
Thickness.
got to move it that way, and you'll see as we go. See, I need to get my hand in there, so that's why I'm leaving it as open as it is. Sometimes I can open it too much, and it's almost impossible to get a small hole.
So you're starting to close it, so I guess you're kind of done with your basic form
No,
at this
I'm
point.
going to take it out more.
More?
Yeah. I just wanted to get this under control. See, she's keeping me on task here. Oh, and what I'm doing is when I'm shaping it, I'm compressing the wall of the form, because I could just go on the inside and push out, but what I'm doing is I'm weakening the structure of the molecules. But if I compress, it gives it more strength, and I can get it out more.
You're pushing against your outside hand, right?
I'm pushing in with my outside hand and out with my rib.
You seem to be using a lot of water. I'm afraid to, because I don't want it to get too wet. And maybe that's my problem. I need to get it wetter, because a lot of times it drags if it's not.
Yeah.
So.
There's there are different ways of throwing. There you have those that say, oh, I throw with very little water, and yeah, that's fine. I like to throw wet because and I throw pretty fast. Okay, I mean, a person that throws dry is probably not this far along in the process.
So that you're taking it back down again.
Yeah, and see how I'm refining that curve,
Mm-hmm.
the profile of the piece? And when I'm throwing, I'm always looking at this line. So I'm not actually looking into the pot, and that's how I can perfect the shape. Because a lot of you know, you could, if I was just concentrating on what's really right in front of me, what happens a lot, you end up with these flat spots. You don't have this nice continual flowing curve. You end up with this, 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 this.
Do you ever use a mirror?
I did when I was a student, and that's a good way to learn. But, you know, I've been doing this so long that I have, you know, I have the feel for it. I have that sensitive touch that I've had to develop. And the funny thing I've just pretty much recently found out about myself is, you know, I've been teaching for, you know, let's say 20, 25 years. Well, I never really intended to teach when I started doing ceramics seriously, but teaching was a way to kind of keep, you know, networked with other potters. It gave me a way to reconfirm what I had learned. But I found out now that I'm not teaching, I'm working at home, and I'm able to actually focus on only my work. Whereas, you know, being in an educational environment, you always feel somewhat obligated to help somebody. Even though I was there on my own, and everybody kind of knew that, oh, he's not teaching today, so leave him alone. But, you know, I always felt I had to. So I've learned that working in solitude, complete solitude, actually is doing me some good, because I'm able to refocus. And I found by teaching, it forced me to take a lot of shortcuts, and I was losing some of those finer points that I had developed when I was younger.
Would you say you're still learning after 40 years, or you
Yeah, I would say you're always learning. You're constantly learning because, you know, you're learning about yourself. You're learning about the clay. Clay bodies change. Processes change, so you learn to adapt to them. Or if you want to learn something, there's always something new to learn. There's so many ways of doing the same thing, or, oh, there are a lot of good pot throwers, but they can't glaze worth a darn. They have no color sense. They could be colorblind. And they just, you know, their forms are nice, but they're kind of ugly because of the decoration of the glazing. So you have to learn how to, you know, you need to learn how to glaze and how to work with color and texture. And some of these people that are great throwers, they say, I hate glazing. I just don't like it. Well, that's preventing you from getting to that next level. And if you can marry the form with the glaze or the decoration, then you've got it. You've mastered it.
We want to raku this spot?
Will I raku these?
This one?
I could. I'm. To be honest with you, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I might just.
What's he asking?
Okay, those bright colored pots that are on the table there,
Texture.
the matte
Yeah, the
lustery
purple.
pots.
Yeah.
That's a process known as raku, which is it was developed for the Japanese tea ceremony that I'm sure everybody's heard of. It's a ceremonial. It's a ceremony where two opposing forces come together. Real Zen thing. You settle your differences. You come to an agreement.
Instead of a duel, they have tea party.
Yeah, you have a tea party.
Sounds more civil.
And so the raku process was developed for that ceremony. And they made tea bowls that they served tea, and they were very quickly fired in a kiln, typically using charcoal, and they'd heat them up, take them out of the kiln, and then quench them in hot water or in water right away. Well, there's a lot of thermal shock going on there, but it was a quick way of getting it done. Well, it's kind of evolved and morphed over the years. The Americans the Japanese, the Asian Japanese, or I should say the mainland Japanese, they're somewhat insulted that we still call it raku because we have taken something that they've treasured and made so ceremonious into something that's so mainstream and very flashy. I mean, their things were very subtle, subdued. So they won't refer to it as raku. They'll refer to it as American something. Okay, so I've got these tools you can purchase at the local ceramic supplies store. And this is another rib that I use, and I use these notches to create a nice firm bead or lip, and it gives it visual strength. It says, okay, this is where the pot ends, as opposed to this little fine, thin lip that basically just takes you on to eternity visually, okay? So
What shape is that notch?
it's just a U shape, okay? Okay, so I think for now that's probably good enough. If I wanted to become more adventurous, which if I had 3 hours, I'd actually stretch this thing way out. Okay, but you get the idea here. There's a lot of, there's a lot of pressure here, and especially right here, where this thing just wants to cave in on itself. But with the use of the ribs and my, years of experience doing this, I'm able to keep it under control. And if I was stretching it out more, I'd probably use a torch. Because I could stop here, put it aside, wait a couple days for it to dry out a little bit, and then go back to it. But I guess I've been influenced by the modern world too much. I just can't wait. So, I found ways of getting there faster. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I see some of your pots have very thin, long necks,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a ½ inch or inch
Yep.
diameter opening. How do you do that? Is that all from the outside, the pressure?
Actually, what I will do is I will throw the round shape, and then I'll bring it in, and my fingers are just so thick that I can't get my finger in there anymore. So what I use is a skewer from for barbecuing, and all I do is I press and use this as an extension of my hand, and I can go up as high as I want. But it becomes the skinnier it becomes, and as I start restricting it in, it gets thicker, and that weight wants it to collapse on itself. So those bottle forms which you're describing are considered the most difficult form to throw on the potter's wheel, because you've stretched the clay out, and then you're asking it to come back in. Okay, so it takes a lot of skill to get there, because especially like in this area here, all that fine center point of weight will just want it to collapse. So you gotta, as you're restricting it, you gotta pull it up too. And so I talked earlier about speeding up the wheel to kind of whip it back up into shape. That's what I use that for, that process for. So any other questions? Okay, well thanks for all coming by and watching and hearing me gab.
Nice job.